Welcome back, everybody, to the Starcraft update, where we talk about all the big things happening in Starcraft 2, and I give you my opinion and my breakdown and my analysis of them. Today, we're talking about one of the most major changes, or proposed changes, since the release of Legacy of the Void. Recently, very recently, today, Blizzard released, and with a presentation from David Kim at WCS Summer. I'm sure they'll have a video of that, or somewhere you can find it. I'll try to put it in the link. A massive set of proposed multiplayer design changes and a way of implementing those changes that they've never really done before. Now, I watched the presentation. There are a lot of changes that weren't in the presentation that are detailed. We're not talking 3 or 4 changes. We're talking about 3 or 4 changes for half a dozen units per race. We're talking about a lot of stuff, so I'm not going to go too deep into it. The numbers are going to change. It's the idea that we're talking about. Don't be like, well, this unit doing 12 damage instead of 10. That's not important. What's important is the idea behind these changes and specifically what they are. We're not talking exact numbers, but we're talking about ideas here. Remember that. Now, first off, David Kim, the multiplayer balance designer, you've probably seen him in my videos before, but he said the idea with StarCraft 2 is to become effectively a perfect game. The most entertaining possible game. Remove any sort of gimmicks or abusive mechanics that aren't really entertaining or necessarily favoring the highest skilled players, but instead replace those with things that favor both more strategically as well as tactically minded players. So, as you can see here, you can read the description. The link, of course, will be in the description below. But they want to make a big set of changes after BlizzCon. BlizzCon, of course, the World Championship, the conclusion of WCS. So right after that, they plan on making a large set of changes. But before that, actually this Tuesday, 2 days from this video, they're going to be releasing a test map with these proposed changes, with potentially a matchmaking system as well to encourage people to test the changes and kind of gauge, especially at the highest level. So look out for that. Look out for more information. But with that, it's a large set of changes designed to all happen at the same time, kind of a big overhaul, about the closest thing you'll get to an expansion. All right, that's enough intro. Let's get to the actual changes themselves. All right, Terran. Now remember, all 3 races have changes. Before you're like, this is ridiculous, let's take a look at everything, and then we'll talk about it. Primary focus is improving the viability of factory unit armies, popularly known as mech compositions. Resource change, we've been working they like the resource change, but it did have a unique effectiveness on mech play. In Legacy of the Void, you do have to expand quicker. You run out of minerals, you run out of gas, and you run out of income quicker. And mech suffers from the inability to be mobile and easily take other expansions as compared to Bio, and that's why Bio has been a lot more favored. The Cyclone. We are planning to explore a complete redesign. Make it a core unit with a powerful anti-armored attack against ground units. Remain fragile, but have a fast movement speed, so kind of like the Hellion. And they say can combo with the Hellion early on in order to defend additional bases, keep the opponent contained. The anti-ground weapon is heavily changed. Damage changed to increased against armored damage, and range increased from 5 to 6. And this means, instead of forcing the lock-on to be used, the lock-on has been removed. It can now target air units only. So the idea here, you see a little GIF below. Before, you'd lock on to the Stalkers, and you'd take out, like, small amounts of units. And that's what the Cyclone is used for now. Kind of a niche situation. But instead, they're trying to make it a mobile anti-ground force. Still not great for splash damage or anything with, like, siege tanks. But it allows you to move around and defend bases against strong units like Stalkers. A Roach Ravager a little bit easier in combos with Hellions and Widowmons and stuff like that. Movement speeds decreased slightly. Still going to be a very quick unit at 4.13 speed. That's much faster than anything but like a Zergling or a Phoenix. Or a Hellion, for example. And Lock-On can now target air units only, so its functionality at sniping things like Banshees, Liberators, Oracles, every once in a while like an Overlord or something like that, is still going to be there. But it's more towards a core unit you make more of to be able to move your army around easier. Supply cost decreased from 4 to 3, health from 120 to 180, which is pretty significant as well. No longer requires a tech lab to build. Fun fact, the 120 to 180 means it's going to take 3 shots from a Liberator as well. Can now be built with a reactor. That's actually a big one. So definitely focused more around that Cyclone Hellion type of composition. That's actually one of the most important changes they're proposing. Once again, we're not going to talk about exact balance, but we're going to talk about what is a big change and what really isn't a big deal, is most of it. Remove the lock-on damage upgrade. So the lock-on will probably remain as enough to take out one unit, but not enough to be like spamming and killing a bunch of units. Because, of course, it's not designed as a real anti-air unit. And, of course, the new animation looks really cool. It's like machine gun rockets, which I think is pretty great, actually. One more time, we'll go through this. And it kind of slams into the stalkers there. Alright, the siege tank. That's a big one. This iconic unit is a critical part of a mech composition. Numerous discussions, a key understanding, the added mobility granted by Medevac, Pickup, and Legacy of the Void also brought about the loss of one of the siege tank's most enjoyable aspects, which is incredibly effective area control. So they're saying that Medevacs making tanks fly around is not really what they want to be seen. And I gotta agree with that. It seems like kind of a gimmick. And now, in order to kind of make up for losing that ability to move around with a Medevac, they're proposing to no longer have that be the case. Siege tanks, not unsiege tanks, just siege tanks. Siege tank damage increased from 35 plus 15 versus armored to 40, which is plus 30 versus armored, which means it will now one-shot Evenlings and Banelings with +1 or even +2 Carapace. So a significant damage increase to large chunks of units, as well as a lot more damage versus armored to really take out those heavier units like Roach Ravager in the backlines. So it's going to be a much stronger space control unit, and when comboed with something like the Cyclone, which is now a stronger mobile unit to deal with smaller amounts of enemies, makes for a more iconic mech composition. I do gotta agree. Mech should not be about siege tanks flying around. It should be about siege tanks slamming into key areas. I like that idea. Of course, the numbers could be tweaked here, but the idea stands. The Liberator and the Thor. Two of everyone's favorite units to watch, at least, maybe not to play. Since its addition, the Liberator has seen much use. We hear and agree with the feedback stating that they're currently too strong all around, as in anti-air and anti-ground. We want to remove the plus light damage to anti-air and still serve as early game anti-ground harassment, as well as late game zone control. So they're big on the zone control. Require a greater commitment to be effective against large numbers of smaller units. That makes sense. To compensate, we are going to focus on amplifying the anti-air capabilities of the Thor. We'd like to explore increasing the splash radius and the splash damage, so pretty much we're talking about mostly Mutalisks, maybe a little bit Corruptors and Phoenixes here, is the big ones we're talking about. Remove the plus light damage, which means the Liberator is no longer sufficient anti-air, in any case, pretty much. Like, even against Mutas, it's not going to be enough. It'll help, like, maybe you can eventually target down, like, a Warp Prism or something, but you're going to need different anti-air than just making a bunch of Liberators and then you kill all the Mutas and then siege up the ground, right? So, anti-air splash is increased. Thor high impact. The anti-air weapon, 250mm Punisher cannons will now be prioritized before the anti-ground weapon. Alright, so the plan is to make them the anti-air ground-to-air type of unit. So the Thor are going to kind of go back to that role a little bit, which I think makes sense. Liberator serves better single-target anti-ground than the Thor anyways, arguably. So making them more fill those roles. I like the idea of a mobile, but still ground-based. Like, it doesn't move as fast. It doesn't fly, but it's still very strong as that anti-ground or anti-air, ground-to-air missile platform that the Thor is. All right. You can see the differences in the types of stuff there. You saw the Liberator, obviously a lot less effective against the Mutas, while the Thor is a lot more effective against the Mutas. Is kind of the entirety of the change. Mutas, of course, probably over 70% of what this applies to. So, all right, the Banshee. The Banshee. Banshees are a unit we'd like to bring into the spotlight. To do this, we'd like to first test having no requirement for the Banshee speed upgrade. We know that Banshees may end up being too strong. If that happens, we can lower the amount the speed upgrade grants. Our goal is to give just the right amount of speed buff so Banshees are used more often than now, and to make the relationship with their counters less one-sided. Which makes sense. A Banshee is an incredibly microable unit, but eventually just kind of gets shut down. It's like a less effective Liberator if you invest in it early on. So they're trying to make the Banshee more accessible. It's still pretty easy to be countered by a lot of different units, like the Cyclone, or by Queens, or by Stalkers and Mothership Corps in general. But this will promote a lot more, because there's a big difference between Liberator Micro and Banshee Micro, and I think we all know that. The Banshee obviously has to stutter step. Each individual shot you can move in between, whereas the Liberator is kind of, I'm going to slap it there, and no one goes into the, just stay out of the circle. So obviously that'll make for more entertaining gameplay to watch Banshees flying around rather than Liberators sieging up and just popping off 40 probes. So, the Viking. We want to make the Viking's ability to transform a situationally useful thing, but we definitely don't want players to build Vikings for the ground mode when there are no air threats in the game. This change should help with that. Ground mode deals +8 at mechanical damage. And remember, Stalkers and Immortals, as well as every mech unit, including Vikings, are mechanical. So, I think the idea is, now that we kind of remove the anti-air capabilities of the Liberator, and the Thor is more focused around large clumps of units, if you're actually making Vikings, you want to have some utility. They're just going for a little bit more mobility when it comes to mech, and this is one way to accomplish it, especially if you're dealing with, like, maybe an oddly timed Stalker push or something like that. And here's one I think everybody's going to like. I couldn't talk to you guys about this when I was at the Community Summit, but I actually tested this. This change here on the Battlecruiser live at Blizzard. And this is one of the most fun ones to see. Changing the Battlecruiser's abilities to be on separate cooldowns rather than relying on energy opens the Battlecruiser for more strategic plays. Using these abilities at the right times will make all the difference between playing better or worse with the unit. We hope that brings the Battlecruisers more into favor. Yeah, make Battlecruisers great again, is what they're saying. The energy bar is removed. It can no longer be feedbacked or EMP'd, because people EMP Battlecruisers, sure. Yamato Cannon and Tactical Jump no longer require energy. Instead, each has its separate cooldown. Yamato Cannon is 71 seconds. Tactical Jump is 71 seconds. What this means is you can jump to a base with 4 Battlecruisers. You can Yamato and take out that base. Well, you need a little bit. 5 Battlecruisers, and then you'll be able to take out the base. But you can immediately jump in Yamato. So what happened before is no one used Tactical Jump because then you couldn't use Yamato Cannon. Or if you used Yamato Cannon, there's no way you're going to use Tactical Jump because they both cost 125 energy. And remove the upgrade that gives it energy because obviously there's no energy. So this goes along the lines of mobility for Battlecruisers and just make Battlecruisers, guys, is what they're trying to say. It's a lot of fun to play with. And I'm very excited. I really think at least some version of this change will go through. Maybe it's nerfed a little bit, but I'm very excited for that. The Raven. We'd like to bring the Raven more into favor while not enabling the unit to cause stalemate games again. Since Terran has so many worker harassment options, we want the strength of Ravens in battles. You don't want Turtle Ravens, you want aggressive Ravens. So 16 damage versus 24 damage auto turrets. Let's take a look here. The Zerglings are coming in. They're not targeting the auto turrets because they're noobs, but obviously you take them out significantly quicker. I mean, there you go. Once again, mech mobility. Now it's like, wow, look at how strong all of this is. These are all just Terran buffs. Like, I'd say almost all of them are Terran buffs, yes. Don't worry yet, Protoss and Zerg players. Because we got Protoss coming up next, and I think there are some things that are going to make Terran players start complaining as well. Everybody get your complaining out now. Get your whining out now, because it's going to be hilarious, all of this. In a good way. But it's going to be a lot of big changes. Protoss. Protoss has seen significant changes and improvements in Legacy of the Void. And with this update, we have a few interesting things. Make the race's interactions with Terran Mech more interesting, specifically. We'd also like to increase the power of the Zealot in certain areas compared to Adepts or Stalkers, because everybody's just making Adepts and Stalkers half the time. The Tempest. In Legacy, we changed the Immortal and other units to make Mech a more viable route for Terrans. It quickly became apparent that late-game Terran Mech really struggled versus Tempest. Do the Tempest Incredible Siege range against ground and air. The unit's efficient... Okay, I'm going to summarize this. Significantly less air to ground. You can see here, 15 to 6 range, which means you can no longer siege up from a long way. And also another one, increases the supply count. So you want to have less Tempests, but they should be more effective at anti-air zoning. But anti-ground is not as effective. Now, wait a second. There's a new ability, the Disruption Sphere. Immediately launches a ball of energy. Now, fun fact, as David said, this ability in testing, while they were just playing around with it, was called the Death Ball. I think you'll see in a second. It's called the Death Ball. But Disruption Sphere, that sounds good too. Immediately launches a ball of energy and fires at the target ground. Damages ground units and buildings in that location. Deals 450 damage over 32 seconds. That sounds ridiculous, right? And that's a lot. But remember, you're going to have less Tempest. They're going to have to get closer to fire this ability. And that's over a 32-second duration, which is, if I do my math right, it's about 12 damage a second, which is good, but it's not going to kill things instantly. On a pretty short cooldown, area of effect radius, that's something to be tweaked. 13 cast range. Okay, it's actually, you can cast it from pretty close. We're going to show, there's a GIF here. I'm kind of showing it. They're going to cast the sphere, and there are literal death balls down here, and they're doing damage pretty quick. I think this is definitely going to take some tweaking. Like, I can see this being abused with things like just slapping a disruption sphere on a mineral line or two of them, and then suddenly the workers all die in 5 seconds. So that's definitely probably going to be tweaked. But the idea, I think, is pretty cool. Maybe make it not affect workers or something like that. There's going to be a lot of tweaks around this ability. Don't be like, oh my god, that's the stupidest thing ever. I see what they're doing. They're trying to make it so you have to make a decision to make a Tempest, rather than Tempest just countering pretty much everything on the ground once you get to the later game. And Legacy of the Void, the Zealot. Adepts and Stalkers have become favored. We'd like to make Zealots better. The research charge will now increase the Zealot's movement speed from 3.85 to 4.13. That's not a big one, but it makes it almost equal with the new Cyclone. Like, the Cyclone had its movement speed reduced, on top of still having the charge ability of being able to charge forward. So, unlike the Adept, which can only really move around well with its shade, the Zealot will always be a presence and be able to move around, and it's much more effective against buildings, against things like tanks and stuff like that. So, pretty much they're trying to make the Zealot a decision. They also talked about the Adept itself, and they said they don't mind too much where the Adept is right now, but they want to just give everybody, pretty much they're going a lot more with the give everybody a bigger stick rather than a smaller one. They're not nerfing things, they're just giving everybody a lot more tools, a lot more sticks and hammers and whatever other medieval metaphor you want to use to work with. So the Zealot is faster after it gets charged. Of course, charge is a big investment, but yeah, so... that goes in line with everything they've been saying so far. Now, this isn't interesting. This is more of a change than a buff or a nerf. I would say it's a buff overall, but the Carrier. The Release Interceptors ability, which is just kind of like, oh, I'm in a fight, release the Interceptors, and then there's no risk, is what they're saying. There's no risk. It's not a decision, you just do it. So it's not very exciting. They want to make Carriers and Interceptors behave more like they did in Brood War, and enable carrier micro and allow the unit to perform in a way that reflects the skill of the controlling player. So you no longer just press the button. Now, remove the Release Interceptor ability. So that's a nerf. But Interceptor cost is reduced from 25 to 5. And auto build is enabled from the start. Now that's kind of more of a newer player decision than, and well, I guess in some situations you want to like turn off auto build or like manage your money, but this makes it significantly less. To refill your carrier, it's 40 minerals now, not 200. That's a big difference. So pretty much they're making it more important to take out the carrier rather than the interceptors. There's a decent chunk of strategies that involve just taking out all the interceptors, and then the carriers are just firing blanks. They're just big hot air balloons that have a decent chunk of HP. And they can never get their interceptor count back up. So the idea here is you make it more of a decision on what you're going to do with your carriers, and it's more important to actually take out the carriers, because taking out the interceptors doesn't matter. Now, This was the change they said was the most questionable, but like most out there, and it's gonna sound like kind of a parody change, but it's not. They're going to buff the Dark Templar. I'm not gonna move down on the screen because I want to just lead into it. We want to mention that this is highly experimental. We have done a low degree of confidence. We admittedly have a low degree of confidence in making it into the live game. We also want to point out we clearly don't want to buff Dark Templars at the stage in which they first enter the game. With that said, we'd like to end ability with the goal of seeing if a player's skill using DTs can be emphasized, even after the point when detection becomes more widely available. Alright. So what that means is, early DTs are still good. If you don't have your Spore Crawlers, or your turrets, or your Observers, or Cannons, then DTs just do a ton of damage. They don't need a buff there. But once you have your Cannons, or you have your Observers, DTs are a large investment that almost no one makes past that point. They just don't make it anymore. So, they want to see DTs used in the later game, and how are they going to do this? New ability. Shadow Stride allows the Dark Templar to teleport a short... It's Blink. It's Blink DTs. They're adding Blink. But you research it after the Dark Shrine completes 121 seconds to research, which is longer than the build time of the already long build time of the Dark Shrine. Cooldown of 21 seconds, which is much longer than normal Blink, which is about 11 seconds for the Stalkers, and creates a visual smoke effect, which looks cool. So it's not like you can just blink back and forth. It's not the same cooldown as Stalkers. It's still a big investment, but you can maybe get your DTs in or out a little bit easier. They went real conservative on the stats with this as well. Like, they really want... I can tell they want this to be a thing, and it's pretty entertaining to see in action there. Well, we'll see if it makes it through. It's going to be a lot of fun to play with, and I'm sure a lot of people are going to complain it's the dumbest thing ever to play against, so look forward to that. Now, Zerg. Zerg has numerous new strategies since the launch of Legacy of the Void. Yet there are definitely areas of potential improvement available. We want to take this opportunity to experiment with a heavy rebalance of the Swarm Host, a redesign of the Infestor and its abilities, and rebalancing the strength of different Zerg tech paths. This means there are changes to units and different tech options, as well as an adjustment to the Ravager that feels necessary, especially given the changes to the Siege tank. The Swarm Host. The new role of the Swarm Host in Legacy of the Void seems to be good, but the unit balance has made it impossible to confirm this. The next few months give us an opportunity to test whether the role is indeed good, so we'd like to significantly reduce the cost of the unit, so that players are incentivized in using it. Depending on the results, we can best determine how to make further moves. Swarm Host cost significantly reduced and increased Locust swoop range. So that's actually a big deal, because the hardest part of using Swarm Hosts, and the role of the Swarm Host in Legacy, they didn't actually detail it here, is on a unit that you use a small amount of, like you have like a hit squad of 5 or 6 Swarm Hosts that come in and they snipe a base, or they take out a mineral line or something like that, and are used as a very mobile harass unit. The reason that people don't really use them is they're a pretty big investment. They rarely get as much damage as you need them to do, and they cut into your overall army supply, leaving you vulnerable to direct attack. So this is just like, okay, you can build this, it's super cheap, and it's more likely to do damage. Of course, the stats can be changed, but they want people to use them to confirm that they're actually useful in what they're trying to do. Because the last time you saw a Swarm Host in a pro game is the last time a player misclicked the button. So. Alright, the Ravager. Now, this is actually a nerf in comparison, like, to the changes to, like, the Siege tank especially. With the addition, Roach Ravager has become used quite heavily. Now, this is not just a straight nerf. I'm going to tell you right now, they're buffing the Baneling and the Hydralisk as we go on. So, we'll give it a second there. But adding the plus armored flag, which means right now, Ravagers are not light, nor are they armored. They just are nothing. They're just biological units. So that means they don't take extra damage to things like Hellions, or to things like Stalkers and Tanks that do, or Marauders even, do plus armored damage. So you see here them fighting against Stalkers, before and after adding that armored flag, effectively here, so. But yeah, they do significantly better. We're going to make it a little bit easier. Ravagers are no longer the counter to a lot of units that you would usually be making against Roaches, so it has to be more of a conscious decision to be able to use Corrosive Bile, as opposed to another unit you can make that's so much different than the Roach, even though it is built from the Roach. So they're trying to make you make a decision. And that's actually happening a lot throughout these changes. The Hydralisk. We have 2 changes in mind for the Hydra, both aimed at making Hydras a core unit as opposed to the Ravager, which is, they're thinking, more of a specialty unit. First, we'd like to change how the speed upgrade works so that Hydras work the same as other Zerg units on and off creep. The situation right now is that Hydras, once they get their speed upgrade, actually don't receive a benefit from creep because they've already reached a certain maximum speed, which is obviously not as good as it could be. So it's easier for you to move on creep back and forth. More like a Ravager speed, especially. Hydralisk attack range increased from 5 to 6, and researching the range upgrade, the speed range upgrade at the Hydralisk Den will give them the ability to have +1 range, giving them 7 range, which significantly outranges Marines. It outranges Stalkers slightly. It makes it easier to kite, especially on creep. So the Hydralisk become a unit that, in essence, kind of replaces the Ravager. They don't want to see people just making roaches and then, well, I guess I won the fight. All right, now we'll make like 20 Ravagers and push in. And Hydralisks are more, you can see them going back to these iconic units like the Siege Tank. The Siege Tank is a great example. The Carrier, the Zealot, the Hydralisk. They're trying to focus on these units that are very recognizable and have people make them more often as well. That's a little bit subtle, but... And this is a big one. The Baneling is the 3rd core unit we want to address. In order to incentivize players to opt for this tech option, we want to make Baneling stronger without seriously impacting how players should micro and splitting. So pretty much, you're forced to minimize damage as opposed to actually killing the Baneling. As you see here, 10 HP. You kill a lot more Marines. Simple enough. That one's pretty flat. I mean, maybe, I think it'll probably end up more at like +5 or something like that. Well, actually 40 HP. We'll see how it goes in tandem with siege tanks and stuff like that. But I gotta say, Hydralisk Zergling Baneling is a lot more entertaining than Roach Ravager, to say the least. The Infestor deserves some love. Yeah, it's not used too often nowadays. Maybe in tandem with Ultralisk, but not on its own as a harassment option. With that in mind, we have some experimental changes, similar to DT Blink. Changes certainly to push the boundaries. We're curious to see if something more extreme would be cool. The ability Deep Tunnel. If you've played in co-op, you've seen this ability before, but Deep Tunnel, or Campaign. Infestors can burrow anywhere in which they have vision for an energy cost. We'd like Infestors to cast all spells with burrow as well. To make the unit easier to find and target, we've also added a small collision radius to the Infestor that exists even while burrowed. They're making it a little bit easier to tell that there's an Infestor right under you. But yeah, the Infestor as, like, the Ninja Hit Squad, the Guerrilla Warfare unit. So Deep Tunnel, 50 mana cost, can be cast anywhere on the map with vision, and an audible warning to the enemy to see where the Deep Tunnel begins. I don't think... Will that mean that you'll be able to, like, see on the minimap, or will it be indicated, like, with a special indicator? Who knows? It'll probably be like Nidus, where it shows up on the minimap as, like, another unit popping into your vision. And I'm sure there's a cast time as well. Like, it doesn't immediate... It's kind of like a Nidus. It takes, like, 8 seconds or something before it gets there. Of course, those stats can always be tweaked. And using 50 mana means you can do 2 fungals, but only if you have 200 energy. So you have to be, if you don't have that huge amount of energy, you can't use all these devastating spells right off the bat. It'll probably use more for infested Terrans, because otherwise you can't necessarily get back. And the Broodlord. With all the changes to Terran, we want to ensure that the Thor has the potential to help counter Broodlords. We've reduced the Broodlord range to match the Thor's anti-air attack range. Range reduced from 11 to 10. This will mostly affect ZVT. It'll affect the other matchups minimally, but that's not a huge nerf. That's more of a just throw that in there at the end type of thing. But remember, this is a very early preview, and things may look considerably different once the changes go live following the November tournament season. That being said, we're very excited and about improving the multiplayer experience. Look forward to the balanced test map being released this week, like Tuesday, August 16th, I believe, is the date they have planned for that. So look forward to that. And one thing David talked about, David Kim, was potentially adding matchmaking for a test map, which is something they've never had before, but that would definitely encourage a lot more people to play it. So that'll be really cool. Now, I'm just going to summarize once again. All the changes are to make the game more entertaining, to benefit players who are more focused on multitasking, things like harassment, or making smart decisions on what units to build, as opposed to just building this strong death ball. So that's what you see with all these changes. My personal favorites, I'm just going to say my personal. You guys tell me your personal favorites, what you think of the changes. But I got to say, I like the Battlecruiser changes. I don't think they'll still be used that often, but the ability to just immediately warp in and just snipe a base, that feels like what a Battlecruiser should do. A capital ship, you tell me you don't have enough power to jump and then snipe. I've seen all the cutscenes. All right, Battlecruisers are good to go even after they tactical jump into battle. I'm very excited for Battlecruiser hit squads. But as for like real changes, because Battlecruisers are still very difficult to get to, I think the Cyclone changes are going to be very interesting, especially when combined with the Siege Tank. So that'll make a more mech-feeling composition, I guess, like what they were going for. Now, as for Protoss, the Tempest changes are going to be interesting, but I think the Zealot and the DT changes are definitely the most exciting for me. I mean, we're not talking about Tier 3 Skytoss, we're talking about units you make almost every game, or at least can be made in pretty much every game, and used in a lot of different ways, so that could be interesting. And now, with Zerg, the Hydralisk changes, obviously, as a Zerg player, I'm liking a lot. I like the Infestor ability with Deep Tunnel. The Swarm Host changes, we'll see how that goes. But yeah, the Infestor, the Hydralisk, the Zealot, the Dark Templar Blink, and the Battlecruiser Cyclone are my personal favorites. I don't know about the others, we'll see how they play out. They don't necessarily get me excited, but I'll have to play with them and see where they go. But yeah, that's my breakdown of the changes. I don't have too much of an opinion there, because I haven't played it yet. I'm sure I'll play through. You'll see plenty of games of me on this channel, and live on stream, playing through. But thank you guys for watching. Give me your ideas. What do you want to see change? What do you think is absolutely ridiculous and imbalanced? I'm sure everybody will be able to find something to complain about. This is the internet, after all. But good luck, have fun, happy StarCrafting. Look forward to this test map coming up in just a few days. And continuing on through November, if you're watching this video anytime between now and then, I'm sure I'll make update videos about these balance changes as well. But good luck, have fun, everybody. And happy StarCrafting. I'll see you next time.